Hello and welcome to the White Collar Fitness Radio, the ultimate podcast for professionals striving to achieve optimal performance in today's fast-paced age. I'm your host, Bruno Dalladoni, online body transformation specialist and founder of The Health Coach Fitness. I'm here to help you optimize your health and fitness, even if you're short on time.
Happy Monday, everyone. How are you doing? So today we're discussing whether you can have abs without actually doing any ab exercises. Let's have a quick think about how you get your abs. You need to have a baseline degree of muscular definition, obviously. And of course, exercise helps with that. But it's not what's going to get your abs to show up. What's going to do that is you losing some body fat. Now, I know that sounds harsh and it's probably a little bit more brutal than you were expecting to open the podcast. I know you like to be teased and warmed up before I start just laying down some truths, but we're just going for it this Monday. For you to be able to get your muscles to show, irrespective of what muscle group you're talking about, whether it's your back, whether it's your pecs, whether it's your shoulders, your biceps, whatever, but especially for your abs, you need to just get lean enough. That's, when people often talk about being toned, and what they mean by being toned is being lean. They just don't know that that's what they mean. If you want to get your stuff to show up and for you to be able to look good with your top off type thing, you need to get a bit leaner so you can look good with your top off. But obviously, this is not the only question, right? The question we opened with is, can you have abs without doing ab exercise? Yes, you can still have a defined, pretty set of abs on you without having to just head bash your sit-ups for days on end. And that's because there are multiple different ways of getting stimulus to any muscle, really, but to your abs. And we can think of the three separate types of contractions your muscle can have or goes through. And this will get a little more technical than I like, but I also believe in having a bit of context and a little bit of background to what I'm saying. You guys can then take this and move on, having a bit of background understanding. So there's three types of contractions your muscles go through: concentric, eccentric, and isometric. Now, your concentric is the squeeze. Now, the technical definition is shortening under tension. If you think of your arm, you think of your bicep. When you squeeze your bicep and you bring your hand towards your shoulder, you bend the elbow, that's a concentric contraction. You're shortening that bicep. You get a nice little bicep peak. You're shortening that bicep under tension. The eccentric contraction is the opposite, is a lengthening of the muscle under tension. Obviously, you need to have some tension, otherwise the opposing muscle, in this case the tricep, would do all the work and you'd have no break. You wouldn't be able to control necessarily how fast your arm would lock out into place. You might break your elbow, there'd be blood, gore, people would cry. It wouldn't be pretty. When you extend your arm, so you've brought your arm towards your shoulder, you've contracted, you've got your peak of your bicep, concentric contraction, awesome. Now, when you do the opposite and you extend that elbow, you try to lock your arm out, your biceps going through an eccentric contraction. It's lengthening. So you start to lose that peak, your muscle lengthens and stretches out under some tension. Obviously, if you're then doing exercise, so you're doing some bicep curls, you're holding the weight. So there's obviously tension there. And then the third type of contraction is an isometric contraction. It's a hold. So if we go back to your abs, if you think of when you're doing a plank, assuming you're doing a plank correctly, You feel it in your abs, but you're not moving. And that's because it's an isometric contraction. The muscle's tense, it's holding its position, it's contracted, but it's not lengthening or shortening. So hopefully that makes some sense. Now, all three of those provide stimulus to the muscle. Again, in this case, the abs. So if you're doing crunches or sit-ups, you're providing a type of stimulus. If you're doing, say, for example, leg raises, again, similar sort of thing, you're moving. So you've got a part of the movement that's concentric, a part of the movement that is eccentric. But the majority of the stimulus you're going to provide your abdominal muscles is isometric. And the reason for that is that you actually need your abs to be able to stabilize your spine and your torso and your trunk. So whenever you're working out, whether you are doing bicep curls or squats, hip thrusts, bench press, honestly, it doesn't matter. Whenever you pretty much do anything under load, and you guys know when I say this, you need to be working out hard. Now, hard is subjective, it's hard for you, but if you're picking up baby weights and you're just juggling them, you're not really doing much. If you're working out hard, it pretty much doesn't really matter what you do. You're putting some tension through your abs in an isometric capacity because you need to be able to create tension in your torso to stabilize your body, stabilize your spine, stabilize your rib cage, so you can generate force. And if you're doing a bench press, push the weights away from your chest. If you're doing a squat, to be able to not crumble and collapse into a heap under the weight of the bar. Pretty much anything you do in the gym is going to require tension through your abdominals. And usually that tension will come in the form of an isometric contraction. Now, of course, you can bolster that with some ab-specific work, but we very quickly land in hip flexion territory. And what I mean by that is that often, if you have spent any time doing abs, any kind of ab work, so especially if you're doing things that require you to lift your leg, hanging leg raises or anything like that, really, bicycle kicks, whatever, like anything, dead bugs, anything that requires you to move your legs, use your legs as a driver, at some point I would hazard a guess, you would have felt that sort of burning sensation, not necessarily in your abs, but more towards your hips, hip flexors, maybe around your thigh, at the very top of your thigh. And often, what you get, people think they're doing abs and they're actually working their hip flexors. Now, of course, there is some ab work involved, but if you're really trying to target and put stimulus through the abs specifically, add more volume to your abs, you have to be aware that, as I've said before in our tempo episode, you're just throwing yourself around. In that episode, I mentioned throwing the weight around, but the principle still applies. You are the weight if you're doing abs, doing some sit-ups, some crunches. So if you're just headbanging and throwing yourself around, the quality of the stimulus you're putting through the target muscle is way less. Making sure that you're intentional with working your abs and keeping tension in the abs, if that's what you're after, is also very important. And for you to be able to do that, you need to understand, or at least have some baseline understanding of the function of your abs. And one of its primary functions is torso stability. And that goes back to our isometric holds whenever you're doing anything else. So if you have in your program things that are inherently unstable, they have inherent movement in them, and they are heavy, you bet your butt you're working your abs hard. So to give you an example, if you've got some heavy walking lunges in your program, you're absolutely targeting your abs hard. Just bear that in mind. Also, anything that's power related, so sprints, Olympic lifts, kettlebell swings, anything that has some degree of power involved, you're also working your abs. But torso stability is a really big one, and you can almost think about working that from a passive perspective as you do everything else. And then the other one is obviously spinal flexion. You flex your spine forwards, squeeze your abs. That's what it does. You're bringing your rib cage closer to your pelvis, right? If you ever decide that you fancy having a look at a muscle chart, have a look at where your abs attach at the bottom in your pelvis and where they attach at the top on your rib cage. And a little bit like the bicep example I used earlier, where when you bend the elbow, you're taking that point where the bicep attaches on your forearm closer to where it attaches on your shoulder, and you're shortening the muscle. It's the same here with your abs. So if you think of shortening the muscle, you're effectively trying to take the point near your pelvis, or where he attaches on your pelvis, and the point where he attaches on your rib cage and your sternum, and you're trying to bring them together. And now you've got a concentric contraction. Obviously, if you move them apart under tension, you've got a bit of an eccentric contraction going on as well. But hopefully you understand, and if you understand that that's what your abdominal muscles do, then you can target them more effectively. Just to finish up the episode, guys, I want to bring it back to the top. Just remember, it doesn't matter how many sit-ups, how many targeted ab workouts you do. If you're not lean enough, they won't show up. I'm sorry, it just is. I hate that as much as anyone else, but it's just how this thing goes. So assuming you want them to show up, because otherwise why would you be listening to this episode? And assuming you are lean enough, but you want to grow your abs, like you'd grow any other muscle, like you'd grow your pecs or your quads or your glutes, then making sure you train everything else you train hard. And just as a bonus point, if you're doing abs, make sure you do abs at the end of your workouts, because you don't want them fatigued for when you have to do those heavy walking lunges or when you have to do heavy squats, because they need to stabilize you to keep your body safe and hopefully injury free. So make sure you tag it at the end when, if they are tired and fatigued, it no longer matters, because you now don't have to hold your body up with 200 kilos on your back. I don't know who's squatting 200 kilos, not me, but you get the point. Make sure, if you want your abs to show up, guys, make sure you're lean enough. Make sure you're training hard. And if you fancy adding some added bonus, you can. But as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to. And if you are going to train abs, just make sure you train them at the end of your workout. Awesome. Hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of a background into abs and can you have them without actually doing sit-ups for days. If you liked the episode, as always, like, share, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars. And I will be seeing you guys next time.